3 years ago, she played a game of truth or dare with her childhood best friend. She lost. Her punishment, divorce me. She didn't even hesitate. She just nodded. On the day she left, she patted my shoulder and said, "Wait for me for 3 years." 3 years later, she stood at my door, clutching a remarriage agreement in her hand. I took a step back and said, "My wife doesn't let me accept gifts from other women." Chapter 1. When the doorbell rang, I was slicing tomatoes, the blade pressed into the flesh, juice running down the cutting board, coating my fingertips in a sticky layer of red. Clara's voice came from the living room. "Philip, someone's at the door. Can you get it?" "My hands are covered in juice," I replied without even looking up. About 5 seconds passed. Then Clara spoke again, her tone noticeably flatter. "Philip, come out here for a second." I set the knife down, wiped my hands with a towel, and walked out of the kitchen. A woman was standing at the door. White dress, long hair over her shoulders, makeup carefully done, that bold crimson lipstick. In her hands was a craft paper envelope. Helen. 3 years without seeing her. She was thinner than before, her cheekbones more pronounced, though the makeup hid most of it. The puffy lines beneath her eyes were obviously drawn on with makeup. The moment she saw me, the corners of her lips lifted into a perfect curve, showing exactly 8 teeth, like she'd rehearsed the smile beforehand. "Hubby." The instant that word left her mouth, Clara was leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed, tilting her head to glance at me. I knew that look too well. It meant, "Explain yourself." Only then did Helen seem to notice Clara. Her gaze paused on Clara for less than 2 seconds before returning to me. The smile stayed on her face, but there was now a trace of scrutiny in her eyes. "Who's this?" I didn't answer. Helen held the envelope out toward me again. "I kept my promise. I came back right on time to remarry you." She lifted her chin slightly, absolute certainty woven into her tone, as if she was convinced I would take it, as if I should have stayed exactly where she left me for the past 3 years, as if the moment she came back, everything would naturally return to the way it was before. I took a step backward. Her hand froze midair. "My wife doesn't let me accept gifts from other women." Helen's smile looked like someone had suddenly hit pause on it. The curve was still there, but the light in her eyes vanished. She stood frozen in the doorway like a wax figure. "What did you say?" I said. I pointed at Clara beside me. "This is my wife, Clara. We got married last year." Helen's gaze finally settled properly on Clara. Clara was wearing a loose gray lounge t-shirt. Her hair was tied into a messy bun without much effort. No makeup at all. A pair of fluffy slippers on her feet. But the way she casually leaned against the doorframe somehow made Helen's carefully crafted appearance suddenly look overly deliberate. Clara gave Helen a small nod. She didn't smile, but there wasn't any hostility either. She just looked at her the way someone would look at a delivery driver standing at the wrong apartment. Helen tightened her grip on the envelope until her knuckles turned white. "Philip, you got married?" I didn't answer. I already had. Helen bit her lip, inhaled deeply, her chest rising and falling twice before her voice dropped half a tone. "You're lying to me, aren't you?" She stepped forward half a pace, her eyes suddenly reddening. "You found someone on purpose just to make me jealous, right? You blame me. You hate me, so you found someone." "Helen," I cut her off. "Before you came here, didn't you check at the registry office?" She froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Beside me, Clara spoke calmly. "Would you like to come in and sit down? Talking in the hallway isn't really ideal." Her tone was polite and steady, like she was welcoming a guest. Helen looked at her and subconsciously took half a step back. It was a very subtle movement. Not fear, more like instinctive insecurity. "No need." Helen clutched the envelope tightly, veins surfacing faintly on the back of her hand. She stared at me, tears swirling in her eyes but refusing to fall. "Philip, have you forgotten what I told you 3 years ago?" I hadn't forgotten. Not a single word. Chapter 2. 3 years ago, Saturday, summer, Ryan threw a party at his house, supposedly a reunion for old classmates. Around a dozen people showed up. I didn't want to go. Helen tugged on my arm. "Come on." Calvin said he hasn't seen everyone in forever. It's rare for us all to get together. Calvin. Just hearing that name made my teeth ache. Helen's childhood best friend. The kind who grew up together from diapers to adulthood. The brother Calvin, she mentioned more often than she ever called my actual name. We'd fought over him at least 20 times. And every single time, she used the exact same line. "We grew up together. What are you even jealous about?" That night, the living room was noisy as hell. Beer cans were piled across the coffee table. Some people were playing cards. Others were slumped on the couch scrolling through their phones. Calvin sat beside Helen, their heads close together as they looked at something on his phone, laughing so hard they nearly fell over each other. His hand rested on the back of Helen's chair, not on her shoulder, on the chair, just 2 centimeters away. I walked over and sat down. His hand withdrew immediately. He smiled at me and raised his beer can for a toast. "Philip, long time no see." I didn't clink glasses with him. Later, someone suggested playing truth or dare. Spin the bottle. A few rounds in, one person got dared to call their ex and say I miss you. Another had to stand on the balcony and yell I'm an idiot 3 times at the street below. Just stupid party chaos. Until the bottle pointed at Helen. She lost to Calvin. Dare. Everyone instantly started shouting. What's the punishment? Yeah. What should she do? Calvin held his beer can loosely, shaking it twice before lowering his head with a smile. I still remember that smile to this day. It wasn't the smile of someone joking around. It was the smile of someone who had been planning this for a very long time. Helen, he said, divorce Philip. Be my girlfriend. 3 years. The entire living room went silent. The cards in Ryan's hand slipped onto the table. Several girls exchanged looks, their expressions changing instantly. I thought Helen would explode. Thought she'd call him insane. Thought she'd throw her beer in his face. She didn't. She lowered her head and thought for maybe 3 seconds before smiling. Sure. That single word. So light. Like she was casually saying, sure. Let's go eat hot pot then. It felt like someone had smashed a hammer into the back of my skull. My ears rang violently, drowning out every sound around me. Ryan stood up and grabbed her arm. Helen, are you out of your mind? It's just a stupid game. You're married. Another girl tried to stop her too. Helen, you're drunk, right? You can't joke about something like this. Helen shook their hands off and tilted her head back, finishing her beer in one go. Then she turned to look at me. Her eyes were bright, not a trace of guilt inside them. Philip, wait for me for 3 years. She reached out and patted my shoulder like she was comforting a child. 3 years later, I'll definitely come back and remarry you. By then, I'll agree to any condition you want. I opened my mouth, but something was lodged in my throat. I couldn't say a single word. Beside her, Calvin took a sip of beer without looking at me. From beginning to end, he never looked at me even once. The divorce process went quickly. When Helen signed the papers, the pen moved across the page smoothly, without even a second of hesitation. After signing, she looked up, handed the pen back to the staff member, then smiled at me. 3 years will pass in no time. She walked out of the Civil Affairs Bureau carrying her purse. A white car was parked below the steps outside. Calvin sat in the driver's seat with the window rolled down, waving at her. She bent down and slid into the passenger seat. The sound of the car door shutting was strangely muffled. I stood outside the bureau holding the divorce certificate in my hand while the July sun burned against the back of my neck. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Ryan. Bro, are you okay? I turned the phone off. That night, when I returned home, her cushion was still on the sofa. Her facial cleanser was still sitting on the bathroom shelf. 2 pairs of her high heels were still in the shoe cabinet. I sat on the living room floor with my back against the couch, and stayed there until sunrise. I didn't cry. I just felt hollow, like someone had scooped everything out of me. Chapter 3. My thoughts snapped back to the present. Helen was still standing at the doorway, her eyes red, clutching that envelope tightly in her hands. Philip, I told you to wait for me for 3 years. I didn't break my promise. Her voice was trembling. That game, that bet. I fulfilled it. Exactly 3 years. Not a single day less. I came here today to keep my promise. She pushed the envelope toward me again until it nearly touched my chest. I already prepared the remarriage agreement. You can name any condition you want. Whatever you say goes. I didn't take it. Clara reached out and pulled the door open wider. It's hot outside. Come in and talk. Helen stood motionless. She stared at Clara's face for several seconds. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You. Her voice cracked slightly. When did this happen between you two? We got married last June. Clara answered. Helen's body swayed. She grabbed the doorframe, her nails digging into the wood. Last June. She repeated the words softly before grinding her teeth together, forcing the next sentence out between them. Philip, you promised you'd wait for me. I never promised that. I looked straight into her eyes. You patted my shoulder and told me to wait for you for 3 years. From beginning to end, I never said a single word. Helen froze. Her lips moved slightly, like she was replaying that night in her head. I knew what she was thinking. She was trying to remember whether I had ever responded after she said those words. I hadn't. Not once. The certainty in her eyes cracked open. Clara turned and walked into the kitchen, her voice drifting back from afar. I'll clean up the tomatoes you were cutting. The water's almost boiling. The moment Helen heard that sentence, something in her expression changed. Not anger, not sadness, something deeper. She watched Clara's back disappear into the kitchen, watched her casually switch on the range hood, watched her take bowls out of the cabinet. Every movement said the same thing. This woman had lived in this home for a very long time. At last, Helen stepped inside. She stood in the middle of the living room, her eyes sweeping across every corner. The couch was new. 2 mugs sat on the coffee table, one dark blue and one cream white. Beside the TV cabinet rested a pair of men's slippers and a pair of women's slippers. A sticky note was attached to the refrigerator door. Mangoes bought out of yogurt. Pick up another box on your way home. The handwriting was soft and rounded. Not mine. Helen stared at that sticky note for a very long time. So long that when Clara walked out of the kitchen holding a glass of water and offered it to her, she didn't even react. Want some water? Clara asked. Helen snapped back to herself, glanced at the glass, but didn't take it. Instead, she turned toward me, her voice low. Philip, let me ask you one thing. Go ahead. When did you stop waiting for me? Her chin trembled as she asked it. I looked at her for several seconds before walking over to the sofa and sitting down. Helen, the moment you got into Calvin's car after we left the Civil Affairs Bureau. Her tears finally fell, not loud sobbing, just silent drops, one after another, hitting the back of her hand, hitting the envelope she held so tightly. Then why didn't you stop me? I said nothing. Clara sat down beside me, set the glass on the coffee table, and lightly brushed the back of my hand with hers. Helen saw that gesture. Her shoulders shrank inward like someone had punched her straight in the stomach. Chapter 4. Helen sat down on the sofa across from us. She placed the envelope on her knees, both hands folded tightly over it, her nails digging into the craft paper. She had wiped away the tears, but her eyelashes were still wet. Philip, listen to my explanation. She inhaled shakily, her voice trembling. That bet. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I had my reasons. What reasons? Calvin, she paused, gripping the corner of the envelope harder. He said that if I didn't agree, he would expose what happened back in high school. What happened? Helen lowered her head, her voice so soft it was almost impossible to hear. In sophomore year, I confessed to him before I met you. He rejected me. After that, I started dating you. She looked up at me, her eyes reddening again. I was afraid you'd find out, so you thought divorcing me to protect that secret was a better deal than simply telling me the truth. Helen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Beside me, Clara quietly lifted her glass and took a sip of water without interrupting. I leaned back against the sofa and stared at the ceiling. Helen, do you even know me? What? If you had told me back then that you confessed to Calvin in high school, what do you think I would have done? She pressed her lips tightly together. I would have said, so what? I turned my head to look at her. You liked someone before you got together with me. What's the big deal? You weren't afraid that I'd care. You were afraid your own pride couldn't handle it. Helen froze completely. I continued calmly. So you chose the path where you wouldn't have to confess anything to me. You divorced me and left with Calvin, rather than saying you were threatened. I paused for 2 seconds. The truth is, part of you wanted to try it too. Helen's lips turned pale. She suddenly shot to her feet, the envelope falling onto the floor. Philip, what gives you the right to say that about me? I stayed beside Calvin for 3 whole years. Every single day. I counted the days down. Every single day. I waited for those 3 years to end. Do you even know what kind of life I lived? Her voice rose sharply, her shoulders trembling violently. Clara glanced at her before softly saying to me, Philip, she's been standing too long. Let her sit while she talks. The moment Helen heard that sentence, it was like someone had pulled a bone out of her body. She collapsed back onto the sofa. She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. Her makeup smeared, exposing the dark circles that concealer could no longer hide. You have no idea how I survived those 3 years. You're right. I nodded once. Because during those 3 years, you also had no idea how I survived mine. Clara stood up and walked into the bedroom. When she came back, she carried a pack of tissues and set it on the coffee table in front of Helen. Helen stared at the tissues for several seconds before slowly pulling one out and covering her face with it. You shouldn't have gotten married. Her voice was muffled behind the tissue, blurred and broken. You shouldn't have stopped waiting for me. I didn't answer. Clara sat back down quietly and gathered the scattered tissues on the coffee table into a neat pile. The living room fell silent for a long while. Only the hum of the air conditioner remained, along with Helen's uneven breathing behind the tissue. Finally, she lowered it, revealing a pair of bloodshot eyes. Philip, let me ask you one last question. Go ahead. If I hadn't agreed to that bet back then, would we not have ended up like this? I looked at her. Helen, if you hadn't agreed, Calvin would have exposed what happened. Then you would have told me the truth. Then I would have said it didn't matter. And then we would have continued living our lives together. Her lips trembled violently. But you chose a different path. That was your choice. Helen slowly closed her eyes. 2 streams of tears slid down from the corners of her eyes, trailing along her chin before dripping onto her dress, blooming into 2 dark circles on the fabric. Chapter 5. Helen stayed silent for a very long time. So long that even the cold air blowing from the air conditioner started to feel irritating. Finally, she opened her eyes, her voice hoarse. Do you want to know what kind of life I lived these past 3 years? I never said I did, but she started talking anyway. The first year, Calvin treated me pretty well, took me traveling, bought me gifts, posted about us on social media every day, the kind of couple flexing posts everyone hates. She tugged weakly at the corner of her mouth. The smile looked uglier than crying. The second year, he stopped replying to my messages whenever I called. He was either busy or in meetings. A new female coworker joined his company. He said she was related to the boss, so he had to entertain her. I fought with him twice about it, and he said I was annoying. She lowered her head, staring at her fingernails. They were neatly manicured with clear polish. At the end of the second year, he broke up with me. Something in my chest tightened. The second year? Yeah, not 3 years. 2. She sniffed softly. He said he was done. Said he'd had enough fun. Said it wasn't interesting anymore. Her hands curled into fists, nails digging into her palms. When he said that, he was packing his suitcase. He didn't even look up. After saying it, he dragged the suitcase out the door. I chased after him into the hallway and grabbed his sleeve, but he shook me off. She looked up again, her eyes so red they looked burned. Later, I found out that boss's relative wasn't any boss's relative at all. They were already together. They'd been together before me. The living room sank into silence again. Clara glanced at me. I understood the meaning in her eyes immediately. Not pity, just a quiet check-in. Are you okay? I nodded once. Helen continued. After he dumped me, I lived alone for an entire year. I was too ashamed to go back to my parents. Too ashamed to contact old friends. Every day was just work, home, and staring at the ceiling in that rental apartment. That year, I thought about a lot of things. Thought about how I ended up ruining my life like this. Thought about what you might be doing. Thought maybe you were just like me. She paused. Alone. Waiting. She said the word waiting very softly. So softly it sounded more like she was talking to herself. I leaned back against the sofa and stared at the logo on the tissue package sitting on the coffee table for a few seconds. Helen. Yeah. 1 year after Calvin dumped you, you finally came looking for me. During that year, did you ever search for news about me? Her body stiffened instantly. You did. I finished the sentence for her. You searched my name. You knew I moved. You found my new address. But you didn't know I got married. She bit down hard on her lower lip. Did you check at the registry office? She shook her head, her voice dry and strained. I didn't. I thought you would wait for me. Why? Because you loved me. She said those words naturally, so naturally that it made my chest turn cold. I leaned against the sofa and closed my eyes for a second. 3 years ago, when you got into Calvin's car and left, did you look back? Helen froze. You didn't. I opened my eyes and looked at her. After you got in the car, you fastened your seatbelt, looked down at your phone, and then the car drove away. You never once looked back toward the Civil Affairs Bureau. The color drained from her face. I stood on those steps watching your car disappear around the corner. The sun burned the back of my neck. My phone kept ringing, but I never answered it. I just stood there for half an hour. You said you thought I'd wait for you, Helen. You never even looked back. So what made you think I would? She curled inward on the sofa like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over her head. Clara stood up, walked behind me, and rested her hand gently on my shoulder, silently, but the pressure was exactly right. Helen stared at that hand, and tears surged into her eyes again. Chapter 6. How did I spend those 3 years after Helen left? The first 3 months barely counted as living. During the day, I sat at work staring blankly at my computer screen. Coworkers had to call my name 3 times before I heard them. At night, I'd come home and open the door to see that pair of high heels still sitting in the entryway. I bent down and straightened them neatly. Did that for a whole week. On the second week, I threw them away, along with her facial cleanser, her cushion, and a scarf she'd forgotten in the corner of the closet. I stuffed everything into a trash bag and carried it downstairs. When I came back up, the half-empty cabinet looked like someone had carved a piece out of my life. Ryan came to see me twice. The first time, he brought a whole case of beer and sat in my living room drinking with me until 3 in the morning. He didn't say a single comforting word. He just drank. The second time, he brought a business proposal. Stop wasting away. He slapped the proposal onto the table in front of me. I can't pull this off alone. I need a partner. Don't waste that brain of yours on a woman anymore. I glanced at the proposal. Smart home systems. I don't have money. You've got the brains. I'll figure out the money. You handle the tech. I stared at that proposal the entire night. The next morning, I locked the divorce certificate into the deepest drawer in the house. Then I went to the tiny 30 square meter office Ryan had rented. During the first year, the company nearly died 3 times. An investor pulled out once. A former employee stole our core code once. The worst time was right before Lunar New Year when we couldn't even pay salaries. Ryan sold his own car to keep the company alive. I slept 4 hours a day, spent months on a folding bed in the office without going home. There wasn't time to think about Helen. Or rather, I didn't allow myself to think about her. In the second year, our product finally launched. We secured a round of funding and moved into a real office building. That night, Ryan treated the entire company to hot pot. More than 20 people crammed into the restaurant's biggest private room. He stood up holding a beer. To Philip, without him, we'd still be eating instant noodles in that tiny shoebox office. I waved him off without standing up. I still had beef in my mouth I hadn't swallowed yet. That was around the time I met Clara. She was sent by one of our Series B investors to conduct due diligence. The first time we met was in the conference room. She sat across from me flipping through my financial reports for 40 straight minutes without saying a word. I sat opposite her with sweaty palms. Finally, she closed the folder and looked up at me. The numbers are fine. I let out a breath of relief. But you have a problem. My nerves instantly tightened again. There's a photo on your desk, a picture of two people, but you placed it face down. You don't want to look at it, but you also can't throw it away. You're building this company while carrying emotional baggage. That affects my judgment. I opened my mouth, wanting to say it was personal, but she had already stood up. I'll report honestly regarding the investment, but as for that photo, I suggest you deal with it. Either turn it over and face it properly, or throw it away. Leaving it face down is the worst option. She picked up her bag and left. The sharp click of her high heels echoed against the floor. One step at a time. That night, I pulled the photo out of the frame, looked at it one last time, then tore it apart. 2 months later, the investment came through. Clara visited the company several more times for follow-up meetings, and eventually we added each other on WeChat. At first, our conversations were strictly work-related. Then somewhere along the way, the topics drifted. One night she sent me a photo of herself working overtime past midnight. A cup of instant noodles sat on her desk. I replied, "Instant noodles aren't healthy. Next time I'll bring you food." After sending it, I stared at my screen for 10 whole seconds, convinced I'd just said something stupid. She replied with a single word, "Okay." That was the first time after my divorce that I felt the empty space inside my chest being gently filled by something. Not much, but enough. Chapter 7. Helen didn't leave right away. She sat on the sofa in my living room, clutching the glass of water that had already gone cold, like she was waiting for something. I knew exactly what she was waiting for. She was waiting for me to soften. Then the doorbell rang again. Clara went to answer it. A man stood outside. White dress shirt, sleeves rolled up to his forearms, carrying a paper bag filled with fruit. Calvin. The last time I saw him was 3 years ago, sitting in the driver's seat of that white car outside the Civil Affairs Bureau. He stood at the doorway, his gaze passing over Clara and into the living room. When he saw me, one eyebrow lifted slightly. When he saw Helen, his expression shifted for a split second. Not surprise, something closer to annoyance. "Helen, so you really are here?" Helen spun around the instant she saw him, practically jumping to her feet. "What are you doing here?" "Your mom called me. Said you dressed unusually formal before leaving today. I figured you probably came to find Philip." He walked inside casually, glancing around the living room before nodding at me. "Philip, long time no see." The exact same greeting as 3 years ago, the exact same tone. I stayed seated on the sofa without moving. Clara closed the door and leaned against the shoe cabinet in the entryway, arms crossed. Calvin placed the fruit bag on the coffee table. "Just bought something random. Don't mind it. Heard you got married. Congratulations." He smiled briefly at Clara, his gaze lingering on her face for about 2 seconds before withdrawing. Then he sat down beside Helen. "Helen, let's go. Stop making things difficult for them." Helen stared at him. "What gives you the right to tell me what to do? I'm not controlling you." Calvin crossed one leg over the other and leaned against the armrest lazily. "I'm trying to stop you from embarrassing yourself. The guy's already married, and you still brought a remarriage agreement to his house. What do you call that?" Helen's hands trembled violently. "Calvin, how do you even have the nerve to say something like that?" "What did I do?" He spread his hands innocently. "Back then, it was just a game. You agreed voluntarily, and when we broke up 2 years later, I didn't stop you either. If you want to come crawling back to Philip, that's your freedom, but if he doesn't want you anymore, then stop clinging." He said it all so casually, like he was talking about somebody else's life. Helen's tears fell onto her dress one drop after another. I looked at Calvin. "Calvin, 3 years ago, that dare, did you plan it beforehand, or was it spur of the moment?" The living room fell silent for 2 seconds. Calvin smiled. "Philip, you're honestly pretty interesting. It's been 3 years and you're still hung up on that. You didn't answer my question." The smile faded slightly from his face. He stared at me for a few seconds before shrugging. "I planned it beforehand. So what?" Helen's entire body jolted violently. "That game, the bottle spins. Who went first and who went after? I arranged all of it." Helen losing to me was inevitable. Even while saying that, he never looked at Helen once. He looked at me. "Philip, let me tell you the truth. I never liked Helen. I just couldn't stand you. Couldn't stand you since high school. She confessed to me and I rejected her. But then she immediately got together with you. I never forgot that." He leaned forward, picked up an apple from the coffee table, and tossed it lightly in his hand twice. What I wanted was never her. He looked straight into my eyes. What I wanted was proof that I could take something that belonged to you. All the color drained from Helen's face. Not the pale of anger. The pale of blood slowly disappearing from someone's body. She turned toward Calvin, lips opening several times, but no sound came out. Calvin set the apple back down and dusted his hands together lightly. All right, Helen, you heard the truth now. Stop making a scene and let's go home. He stood up and smiled at me. Sorry about that, Philip. We were young and reckless. Then he turned toward the door. My voice stopped him halfway there. Calvin. His footsteps paused. Take the fruit with you. My wife doesn't eat things brought by other people. He turned back to look at me. This time, there was finally a crack in his smile. Clara bent down, picked up the fruit bag, and handed it toward him. Thanks, but no need. Her tone sounded exactly like someone rejecting a misdelivered package. As Calvin took the bag, his fingers brushed the edge of it and paused briefly. He looked at Clara again, then at the living room decor, the 2 mugs on the coffee table, the decorative painting hanging on the TV wall. His Adam's apple bobbed once. Without another word, he opened the door and left. The sound of the door closing was much heavier than the sound of his car door 3 years ago. Chapter 8. After Calvin left, Helen sat on the sofa for a very long time. Her tears had already dried up. Her makeup was completely ruined. Lipstick smeared all the way to her chin. She looked like someone whose bones had been pulled out. Collapsed limply into the couch. So it was all arranged in advance. She repeated the words under her breath. Even the bottle spins, he planned all of it. I said nothing. Clara came out of the bathroom carrying a warm towel and placed it on the coffee table in front of Helen. Wipe your face. Helen stared at the towel for a moment before suddenly laughing. The sound was sharper than crying. CLA. Clara, right. Clara nodded once. You don't hate me. Hate you for what? Helen bit her lip. I'm your husband's ex-wife. I came to your house with remarriage papers and caused a scene. Most women would. You're his past. Clara interrupted her, her voice calm and even. The past can't be changed. The only thing I can do is live the present well. Helen stared at her for a long while. Then she lowered her head, picked up the towel, and slowly wiped her face. For a long time, after wiping away the concealer, lipstick, and mascara, her bare face was finally exposed. The dark circles under her eyes were heavy. The lines around her mouth were deeper than they had been 3 years ago. Her lips were dry and cracked, with peeling skin at the corners. She folded the towel neatly and placed it back on the coffee table. Philip. Yeah. Do Ryan and the others know I came to find you? No. She went silent for a second. After that happened, did anyone ever tell you what happened afterward? What do you mean? I mean, after that party, after you left, did Ryan or the others ever tell you what happened that night? I glanced at her. What are you referring to? Helen lowered her eyes. After you left, Ryan cursed Calvin out really badly. I know. Her head lifted suddenly. You know. Ryan told me later. He said he pointed a beer bottle at Calvin and cursed him out for 20 straight minutes. Calvin just sat there smiling the whole time without talking back. Helen's shoulders sagged lower. Ryan told me something else too. She looked up again. He said you smiled. After Calvin got cursed out, you smiled and said, stop yelling at him. I agreed to it willingly. Helen closed her eyes. Willingly. I repeated the word softly. Helen, from beginning to end, you always believed this was your own choice. You believed you had the right to decide the fate of this marriage. You thought you could leave and still come back because you believed I would always be your backup plan. Her eyelashes trembled. You never considered that backup plans can disappear too. She opened her eyes and looked at me. The certainty she once had 3 years ago was gone. So was the confidence she carried when she first arrived today. All that remained was emptiness, like a dried-up riverbed after the wind had swept through it. Nothing left. So what am I supposed to do now? The question didn't really sound like she was asking me. It sounded more like she was asking herself. Clara stood at the kitchen entrance holding a plate of freshly sliced tomatoes. She didn't interrupt. She simply stood there quietly while the warm light fell across her body, her shadow stretching across the floor. The entire home was peaceful. But this peace was different from the emptiness 3 years ago. Back then, the silence came from being hollowed out. Now, it came from being filled completely. Helen felt the difference. I watched her gaze drift across every detail in the living room. The car keys resting on the shoe cabinet, the 2 t-shirts hanging to dry on the balcony, the framed photo sitting on the bookshelf. In the picture, I had my arm around Clara in front of a field of blooming rapeseed flowers, smiling so hard my eyes had nearly disappeared. Helen stared at that photo for a very long time. Then she stood up. She bent down, picked up the envelope from the floor, and brushed the dust off it gently. She didn't open it, didn't offer it to me again. She only gripped it tightly in her hand until her knuckles turned white. Chapter 9. Helen walked to the door, her hand resting on the handle. Then she stopped. Her back faced me, shoulders trembling slightly. Philip. Yeah. If time could rewind, back to that night, back to the moment when the bottle landed on me. She paused. I would have flipped the table over. I said nothing. She turned around. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying anymore. There was even the faintest curve at the corner of her lips, carrying something self-mocking and shattered. But there's no going back now, right? I nodded once. She inhaled deeply and straightened her back. As long as you're doing well, that's enough. After saying that, she pulled the door open. Halfway through, she paused again. Clara. Clara poked her head out from the kitchen. Yeah. Are you good at cooking? Clara froze for a second. I'm decent. Helen nodded. His stomach's weak. Don't let him eat food that's too spicy. And don't give him cold milk in the mornings. He'll end up stuck in the bathroom. In winter, he kicks the blanket off in his sleep. So remember to cover him again during the night. She said everything in one breath. Clara looked at her quietly for a few seconds before replying. I know. Helen tugged weakly at the corner of her lips. Thank you for taking care of him. Then she walked out. When the door closed, the final sliver of light in the crack disappeared with it. I sat on the sofa staring at the closed door, my mind completely blank. Clara walked out of the kitchen and sat beside me. She didn't ask whether I was okay, didn't say anything comforting. She simply reached out and held my hand. Her palm was warm. Her fingertips rested lightly against the back of my hand while her thumb slowly brushed across my knuckles. I opened my mouth. Clara, The things she said, about my stomach, the cold milk, kicking the blanket. I know. You knew all that. When your stomach hurts, you hold it but never say anything. You never touch cold milk. So I stopped buying it. And the blanket thing, I noticed during the first month. Now I set an alarm for 3 in the morning to get up and tuck you back in. She said all of it casually, like she was reading a weather forecast. But my nose suddenly stung. Everything from the entire afternoon. 3 years ago. The 3 years in between. Helen showing up today. Calvin's words. All of it surged upward at once and lodged in my throat. I turned and pulled Clara into my arms. My chin rested against the top of her head. Her hair brushed against my neck, carrying the scent of shampoo. Philip, you're squeezing too hard. I loosened my grip slightly. Don't. She wrapped her arms around my waist in return. Her voice muffled against my chest. I said you're hurting me. I didn't say let go. So I tightened my arms again. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains outside the window, scattering across the floor in warm patches. In the kitchen, the water in the pot had long since reached a boil, the lid rattling again and again, muffled against my chest. Clara said softly, the water's boiling. Let it boil. The noodles will get soggy. Then we'll cook another batch. She laughed quietly, her shoulders trembling lightly in my arms. After that, neither of us spoke again. We just sat there, listening to the lid rattling against the pot, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, listening to my own heartbeat. The man who sat in an empty living room 3 years ago, leaning against the sofa until sunrise. He was gone now. The hollow place inside me had finally been filled completely, without even the smallest crack left behind. Chapter 10. After Helen left, I never saw her again. Ryan mentioned her once, though. Helen moved away, left the city, went south. Heard she works admin at a small company now, rents a tiny apartment, and adopted a cat. He took a sip of beer while watching my expression carefully. Don't overthink it. I'm just mentioning it casually. I'm not overthinking. Good. He nudged the beer can toward me. Did you look at the third quarter proposal yet? Yeah. The budget's too high. Then cut it again. Life simply went on like that. News about Calvin spread even faster. The girlfriend who was supposedly the boss's relative didn't stay with him for long. Rumor said they broke up within 6 months. Later, his company got dragged into a contract dispute lawsuit that lasted more than half a year and nearly wrecked the business. Ryan was talking about it while I was peeling an apple for Clara. Sometimes karma hits surprisingly accurately. Ryan sighed. I handed the apple to Clara. She took a bite. The peeling's uneven. Just deal with it. I refuse. She handed the apple back. Peel it again. Ryan rolled his eyes dramatically from the side. Could you two at least think about how this feels for a simp like me? Clara thought about it seriously for a second. No. Ryan grabbed his beer and left. That night, I was collecting laundry on the balcony. Clara leaned against the balcony doorway holding a cup of hot milk. Philip, do you know what day today is? I paused and thought for a moment. Our first wedding anniversary. That was last month. You forgot. Then what is it? Today marks exactly 2 years since the first time you said you'd bring me food. I froze briefly. She remembered dates far more precisely than I did. What flavor were the instant noodles that day? Pickled mustard greens flavor. You even remember that. The first meal you brought me was tomato egg noodles. You put 2 fried eggs in the bowl. The noodles were a little soggy because you carried them over from the company and walked for 15 minutes. She took a sip of hot milk, but I didn't say anything because I didn't want you to feel embarrassed. I took the last t-shirt off the drying rack, folded it neatly, and turned around. She stood there wearing one of my old t-shirts, her hair loose, no makeup on her face at all, her fingers wrapped around the cup while steam from the milk drifted upward, brushing softly against her eyelashes. I walked over and draped the folded t-shirt over her shoulders. I'll make you a fresh bowl tomorrow. I guarantee the noodles won't get soggy. You can't guarantee that. Yours always get soggy, yet you finish every bowl, because you made it. After saying that, she turned her head and drank her milk, the tips of her ears tinting faintly red. Beyond the balcony, city lights glowed in scattered patches. Somewhere far away, music was playing. The melody was too distant to recognize, only soft notes drifting through the wind. She leaned against my shoulder. The warmth of the milk traveled through the cup and against my arm. Philip, From now on, don't open the door for other women. You're the only woman in this house. Even if the doorbell rings, don't answer it. Let me answer. Okay. And also what? She looked up at me, her eyes reflecting the lights beyond the balcony, bright and shimmering. And also, peel the apples properly before giving them to me. Don't make me ask you to redo it myself. That's embarrassing. I laughed softly, then lowered my head until my forehead rested against the top of hers. She didn't move away. The wind drifted in through the balcony, gently swaying the last empty hanger on the clothesline. It made a soft little clinking sound, like something had finally settled exactly where it belonged.